Yuval really did a, but this isn't happening to your dirty, backwood, savage, flea-ridden, disgusting, ugly, backwards countries. This is happening to white people. You would think that he would have learned something when people were talking about the difference in the response to what's happening in Ukraine versus what's happening to Palestine. He learned nothing.
2 days ago, I posted a video on this channel where a lady was talking about going in depth on why people treat the Holocaust like the worst thing that has ever happened in human history. Even opening that video, I asked the question that do you guys think that the Holocaust is the most tragic thing that has ever happened in human history? This creator went on to talk about it and even mentioned that the reason why the Holocaust is so highlighted compared to slavery is because Israel people paid for it. There is a white creator on TikTok who decided to stitch to this lady's video, and his response has just been what is all over my FYP on TikTok because people are using this as a teaching moment. Went on to talk about how this lady sounded out of touch to have compared atrocities and saying that the Holocaust is the worst thing that has ever happened in human history. And in the same breath, it went on to say it is the worst thing that has happened to civilized people. This video is a lot. His video did not have time to even germinate well because I wonder what the response would have been if that video was on his page for 24 hours. I could no longer find the full video. I don't know if he deleted it, but before he could delete the video, it has already taken so much space on TikTok. This man literally watered down and dismissed every single thing that this lady had mentioned in her video in another way, kind of confirming what this lady is saying. He said she is out of reality to be comparing atrocities, but still went on to do the same thing. If you know you're in a rush to watch a video, maybe this video is not going to be for you because I feel like this is a teaching moment and everybody needs to digest every single thing that these people talk about. Hence the reason why I kind of divided it into two parts. So this is going to be the first part of the stitches, and after this one, the second stitch is going to go live. So without wasting much time, let's just get right into it.
Just that it happened within a civilized society or a modern world, but Germany specifically was seen as the peak of civilization globally. They led the world in classical music, in scientific discoveries, in industry. They were seen to have some of the greatest philosophers and thinkers of the world. And it is from there that all of this happened. And so part of the reason that we regard the Holocaust so severely is because of the global reckoning that followed, that society was not enough, that even the highest forms of sophistication and education was not enough to stop millions of people within the span of just a few years, right? 1933 to 1941, the start of the Holocaust, just 8 years. And within that short time frame, this wasn't enough to stop millions of people from turning into monsters.
Yuval, your video literally falls into the trap of genocide exceptionalism that people are saying is given to the Holocaust. I think a lot more people would have agreed with you if you hadn't added this part in. Disclaimer before I begin, we are on the same side and I will block you if I see any Holocaust denialism in the comments or anti-Semitism, or anti-Blackness for that matter. Germany was already doing a lot of pillaging in Africa and Asia, so this idea that people suddenly turned into monsters within 4 years is not true. Germany, being known for sophistication and education and Enlightenment thinking whilst pillaging African lands, is exactly what we're talking about. Why was that not seen as an indictment when it was happening years and years and years before the Holocaust? I've talked about how Nazi officials were literally inspired by the tactics used against the Nama and the Herero people in the genocide in Namibia that took place from 1904 to 1909, and the person, General Trotha, who was doing it, had used those same tactics to quell the Boxer Rebellion a few years before that. These tactics were very industrialized and systematic, so again, why was that not seen as an indictment on the German society? The way you're presenting it here is that suddenly Germans became these racists within a few short years, when that is not the case at all.
People could not explain this away by saying that it happened in some far-off corner of the world contained to a single country, or that it happened just as a result of one group severely overpowering another, or that it was just barbarism and savagery, because it wasn't. This was heavily organized, systematic, and it happened across a continent of global superpowers. And I think what's particularly difficult for people to wrap their heads around is that Hitler did not really need to resort to force to do this. He wasn't Stalin. The people just worshipped him.
This literally sounds just like that CNN correspondent who said that the invasion of Ukraine was uniquely disturbing because it was happening in Europe. I just want to know what makes it uniquely disturbing when we know that all people want to live and do not want to be conquered in such a way and overpowered in such a way. And those same industrialized nations that this happened amongst were doing those same things to people in their colonies. I always get really confused when people talk about how the world stood by and watched as Nazis systematically eradicated Jewish people, but that was what was being done to people in the colonies of those same superpowers that people are shocked never intervened. Why would they intervene? They were doing that to Black and brown people in those faraway lands you just mentioned. Those same educated Germans who suddenly turned into monsters that worshipped Hitler had spent years and years and years reading publications that were talking about how systematically the Nama and Hera people were being exterminated and how that was a good thing for Germany. This is how they talked about indigenous people that they had pushed into the deserts to make them starve and die of thirst. They said, like a wounded beast, the enemy was tracked down from one waterhole to the next until he finally became a victim of his own environment. The arid Omaheke Desert was to complete what the German army had begun, the extermination of the Herero nation.
I actually agree with their overarching point, which is that we tend to teach history in a very linear way. We focus on single events as opposed to teaching history more thematically, and how much more unifying it would be to learn genocide as a theme as opposed to just one-off individual horrible events.
And I agree with you. Let's talk about the themes, which is why I bring up the genocide of the Herero and Nama people by the same people who engineered the Holocaust, or at least who were inspired by those tactics that were used. Unfortunately, this part of your video really did a lot of disservice to your argument and really fell into the trap of Europe is the heart of enlightenment, so atrocities committed there are going to sting more and be more visceral than atrocities committed in the heart of darkness, aka Africa and other colonies in the non-Western world. These acts were done by the same people, but it's the victims that were different. That is what we're calling attention to. Because while yes, the Nazis did not consider Jewish people at the time to be white, they were still European, and that is at the heart of why, in retrospect, the Holocaust is given a level of reverence that other genocides are not, and you actually just agreed with us by making those statements in this part of your video. And this conversation isn't just being had with the Holocaust, it's also being had with the plight of Palestinians right now, where people are recognizing that the reason why Palestine is getting so much more attention is because the victims are not Black, whereas the victims of the genocide in Sudan, Congo, Tigray, etc. are Black, and that's why those aren't getting as much attention. So it's just a matter of really seeing things for what they are and calling them out as we fight for the liberation of everybody.
Majority of you don't even know enough about slavery to be talking about slavery, let alone trying to compare slavery to other historical atrocities like the Holocaust. As an archival historian, somebody who is trained particularly on the subject of slavery, that is my area of expertise, the general public still does not have an accurate conception of what slavery is, what slavery was. And that is not a coincidence. That is a remnant of the atrocity that was slavery. That is intentional. Slavery lasted for centuries. Slavery shaped nations, shaped entire systemic structures. The economic effects of slavery are still felt today. And the general public does not understand or even have an accurate baseline conception of what slavery was. That is unique. That is unique to slavery. Slavery, like, I'm not saying, okay, it's worse, it's better, that's not how you should be conceptualizing slavery. That's not even how you should be thinking about slavery. You should be thinking about slavery from the perspective of it is not comparable to anything else. It is a completely unique historical atrocity. Slavery lasted for centuries, and all of the historical accounts and narratives that we have of slavery are still biased. Majority of the histories, if not all, that we have on slavery come from the perspectives of enslavers. Enslaved people had such little agency that they had no control over how the historical narratives of their own torment were being written. We know so little about the interior lives of enslaved people, despite the fact that slavery lasted for centuries and there were just unfathomable horrors that occurred during slavery for centuries, that there's an entire discipline of academic history dedicated to beginning to fabricate, beginning to conceptualize what their lives were like. Slavery is not comparable to anything else. Most of you don't even have a baseline understanding of what slavery was. Because if you did, you would know why it's just not comparable to anything else. If you want to learn more about slavery, okay, cool, we can have that conversation. You guys can start reading the journals of like plantation owners like Thomas Thistlewood. They're absolutely heinous, but they'll give you a little bit more of an understanding into how bad it was. But as far as trying to compare slavery to other things, no, it's not comparable. Like, stop doing that. It's not productive, it's not comparable, and honestly, it doesn't really do anything but rage bait people into having conversations they're just not equipped to have. So,
That's all I'm gonna say on that. If we want to learn more about slavery, let me know. We can have those conversations. I'm always here to, educate and do that. But no, stop this conversation.
I saw that Black creator's video about how we teach the Holocaust, and I do think Yuval's stitch was disingenuous. Because immediately after I saw that Black creator speaking, I knew exactly what they meant. We have to remember that the United States educational system will never, ever teach us anything that they cannot personally benefit from down the line, particularly when it comes to history and our collective historical memory. This is why a lot of people who are outside of marginalized communities say that post-secondary education is where they've learned the most about American history, not through the lens of the K-12 educational system, but rather it's even depending on the professor or the school that you go to, but rather they have expanded their knowledge about marginalization and the histories that have led us here to where we are today. It's for that reason that Republicans want to refer to chattel slavery as forced migration or indentured servitude. It is for this reason that our educational textbooks, the things that we want to give to our children, the next generation, are constantly battlegrounds for the truth. And that's exactly what that person was talking about. So from the eyes of the U.S. educational system, how would it service the U.S. government? How would it service U.S. interests to teach about King Leopold? To teach about the very stark realities of the transatlantic slave trade? Even when we talk about the civil rights movement, a lot of things are simply brushed over in service of promoting nonviolence over any other form of action. What purpose does that serve? We cannot just imbibe historical texts, especially that is handed to us by local and state governments in the form of curriculum requirements, right? And not ask, why is this a version of history that we are taught? And to say that the horrors of the Holocaust were unique because of Germany being a civilized society completely eradicates the fact that that civilized society is something that marginalized people have never experienced from European entities. Which is why people ask, like the academic conversation that was being had, why aren't the atrocities that were experienced by the Congolese held up to the exact same light? And for me, in my opinion, it's because it didn't serve a purpose for Western entities to do so.
We're talking about the Holocaust again. And just to say, I never followed Yuval, but I did know him as somebody who's super intelligent. However, I'm not surprised that this was his response to Madison. And if you haven't watched it, I can't stitch it. Long story short, TikTok doesn't like me. And to clarify, Madison was basically explaining why people are so knowledgeable about the Holocaust and why to so many people the Holocaust seems to be the biggest tragedy that happened in the world. And she basically said that this is because Israel paid for it, right? And now I don't necessarily agree with the exact terminology used. I knew exactly what she meant. And you've all took that video and basically started with, you have to be very detached from reality to say that, which is again kind of funny. And it's not funny, haha, but it's funny kind of sad because I did expect such a response from somebody like Yuval, not by personality, I don't know Yuval, but by lack of perspective, an important perspective. And I just noticed I've been saying Madison and not Madison, and I'm very sorry, but she was talking about more than just numbers. And there's so many layers and perspectives to the conversation that she was trying to have, but let me just focus on one, sociology. What is it about America and how America is socialized to view its own people that would make you think that the Holocaust is bigger than slavery? Not saying that it's not saying that it is. What is it about Yuval and his perspective and how he's been socialized in the world to view the Holocaust as the first time a civilized nation could turn into animal? And perhaps not first time, but first time in this kind of civilized era of the world, basically. In the meanwhile, right before it, Germany was pillaging and massacring people in Asia and Africa. What is it about the world that people can find themselves being more empathetic and understanding towards the Holocaust and the survivors and victims of the Holocaust, but mainly one specific population, and deny the descendants of those other survivors of Holocaust that same empathy, like Romani people? And once more, this is not even the tip of the iceberg of the conversation that Madison brought to us. It's just one crumb of a perspective that is necessary. It is absolutely necessary to understand why we know so much about the Holocaust and so little about our own history here in America. And I'm not dealing with the Holocaust deniers or anti-Semitism or anti-Blackness shit either, so don't get that shit in my comments. But I'm just saying this is a big ass conversation. And I think you've all had tunnel vision on one thing and one thing only, which denied the perspective that people like myself, Madison, and others really need.
My Invisalign is in, so I apologize for the lisp, but I wanted to talk about this conversation with Yuval. I have watched his response, and I think that a couple of things need to be addressed. not related to the content of the discussion. First and foremost, I see a lot of character assassination going on within my comment section and Madison. I'm going to say this as clearly as possible, but a lot of people on this app, not Yuval, not creators generally, but a lot of people that are on these comment sections are generally very, very punitive. You are very, very black and white about who you perceive as good and bad, when I know for a fact many of you, if not most of you, did not know a single thing about other genocides that have occurred. I know for a fact that all of us are ignorant in some capacity, and that is a problem that needs to be addressed. But that also means that our ignorance is a product of our conditioning. Our punitiveness and our all or nothing capacity of understanding who a person is based off of their opinions is ultimately a punitive punishment that we are inflicting on other people without the capacity of extending grace, respect, dignity, the things that we all want for each other. I have a ton of respect for Yuval in his advocacy. Over several months, he has done so much to help Palestinian families, has done so much for Palestinian advocacy on social media, and I cannot emphasize enough that calling him Zionist, calling him racist in this particular moment is unhelpful, because I also know for a fact that many of us, I'm not saying myself and I'm not saying other people of color, but I'm positive that many of us do not know all of the genocides that have occurred, all of the people that have been disrespected, all of the people that have suffered in the name of white people generally, in the name of an advancement of society as a whole. For example, Indians, having been persecuted, having been targeted by the British, still are inflicting a genocide in Kashmir. Our suffering does not entitle us to claim land, to claim life, to claim power in any other capacity. And this is my main criticism with TikTok, because this is not how discourse should be. Do I agree with him personally? No. Do I think that there are harmful behaviors and thought patterns that he possesses, that he's putting out? Sure. But I say this from a place of empathy as someone that has had to unpack Zionist propaganda, American propaganda, growing up. In fact, my own biases were not unpacked by learning about my own people's genocide, but rather reading this book in high school. Before I became a communist, before I learned what fascism was, I learned that omission and outright lies are the same, and how that plays a role in US history. And I'm sure there's many more things for me to learn, biases that I have to unpack. Those are things that we can hold each other accountable to. And I think this is one thing that TikTok has yet to embody. While TikTok has been a great hub of expanding our knowledge and learning from scholars directly, at the same time, we have not unpacked how we respond to other people and how that perpetuates this cycle. That also doesn't mean that we're going to have racists and sexists within our community. That doesn't mean that we should have a Zionist within our safe spaces and our circles and our organizing capacity. I want you to personally think about the harmful biases that you have, that you may or may not be aware of. And if someone were to do that to you, in that event, when someone shows you grace, shows you kindness, so long as it is in good faith on both ends, there can be an agreement. There can be an ever-expanding knowledge base. And over the many months that I've consumed his content, he has shown nothing but gratitude, compassion, kindness to every single person I've seen. I think the beauty of TikTok is that it enables us to have this discourse. I also think one of the drawbacks is, were we to have this discourse one-on-one, we would not have millions of people chiming in and escalating the situation. I have seen a lot of anti-Semitic comments myself, and I will say that I do not tolerate, zero tolerance whatsoever to anyone that is pushing that kind of content.
What do you guys think about what they all said? What do you think about this part that you have watched? Because, like I said earlier, there's still part two. So relax, grab a popcorn, and take your time to digest every single conversation that these people are having in this video. Let me hear what you guys think in the comment section. First, it was like a very pissed, reaction. Like, why is he saying all these things? Was he trying to dismiss what the first creator had said by saying, oh, it's the worst thing that has ever happened to civilized people, and she's out of realities to be comparing atrocities, then going ahead to compare the same thing as well. Like, why is it like that? The only part I'm not mad about is the fact that thank God that you actually responded to Madison and the lady who had started this conversation. Thank God he responded to that lady, because if not for that, that wouldn't have opened the door of this in-depth conversation that people are now having, every single conversation that we are now having today, because I feel like it's very, very important. It's a very important part of history, and I think this is the reason why he's getting the attention that he's getting right now on TikTok. And this is the reason why I'm telling you guys to sit back, relax, because there's still going to be a part two. So without wasting much time, let's just jump right into the second part.